his biography, Confessions of a Caricaturist with Pen and Pencil. This is his drawing on the cover. It's only volume 1, however. It doesn't take us up to where it should go, but someday I'll find volume 2.
It's a beginning.
Yes, and I've just collected another Furness's books, one of the novels that he wrote. So we'll catch up with Furness. Now, as I say, these are just things I've found here in the last few weeks. Modern things, old things.
Well, let me
You were asking about this, about
what
Evelyn Waugh.
yeah,
Hold
what
it.
does Evelyn, okay, yeah, what's the connection between Evelyn Waugh and GBS?
I'll give you a few minutes to explain. There's a long
Yeah.
chain of connection here.
Yeah.
This book was written by Francis Donaldson. Now, I don't know if Francis is a man or woman, really, but he or she wrote a book all about the Marconi scandal in 1912. Now, you may or may not be familiar with that. The Chesterton brothers were very much involved with that in their magazine at the time. It was a kind of stock speculation. Members of Parliament were in on the fact that Marconi was about to set up a series of radio transmitters throughout the British Isles. And so they knew to invest in his company, because when it was made public, all the shares would shoot straight up and they could sell and make a fortune, which they did, but some members of the British government didn't think that was kosher, so they had a big parliamentary investigation into what was going on there. And Shaw attended the hearings, according to Francis Donaldson, who wrote the book all about the scandal, which I have in the collection. Anyway, she or he was a neighbor of Evelyn Waugh, and in this book they discuss that book, the scandal, and the Chestertons and the whole business. And so that's why that particular book is here. You were also asking about Woodhouse.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Being in the field of humor, you'd think there'd be a great connection between Woodhouse and Shaw, but not much. But there does happen to be a certain book which Woodhouse wrote, which according to Betty Green, again, is a kind of direct descendant of Cashel Byron. And if I just have 1 second, I can find out what it is here. Those of you who are Woodhouse fans might know this book.
Ira and I used to be Woodhouse fans when we were young.
It's called The White Feather.
The white
Yeah.
feather, the white feather.
And according to Benny Green, he's let's see, sent to Coventry by disgusted and frankly faintly disgusting school. Sheen, the hero of this novel, wins back his good name by taking boxing lessons from the great Joe Bevan, one-time world lightweight champion and a prodigious Shakespearean scholar, bearing himself like the true descendant of Shaw's Cashel Byron, that he undoubtedly is. So I someday hope to add the white feather to this collection if I can find it somewhere. Here's an interesting item which I just found. It's written by a man named Christopher Hollis for the Catholic Truth Society in London in 1932. It appeared in the Dublin Times in 1928. The Dublin Review, was it? Dublin Times. Anyway, the Dublin Review in April 1928, in which Mr. Hollis warns Catholics that even though Shaw seems to put the church in a good light in the play, that he's defending the church for all the wrong reasons, and he explains what these wrong reasons are. It's a fascinating book.
Well, if you read the play, you know.
Here's The Science of Life from 1931 by H.G. Wells, Julian Huxley, and somebody named G.P. Wells, which I don't know if that was a relative or not,
Yeah.
in which they take dispute with Shaw and Butler and Lamarck on
Oh, and
evolution
Oh, sure.
and its nature. That's a fascinating few chapters there. This is a fascinating little encyclopedia, or a book of the year, as it were, put out by the Encyclopedia Britannica back in 1924. I'll bet if you've ever seen it.
No.
These eventful years. And
2 volumes.
all fields of endeavor are covered by various people.
Yeah.
It's an amazing list of contributors, including Sigmund Freud, Madame Curie,
Yeah,
and the
this-
one.
All writing.
Well, no,
all
what this
writing
is,
articles,
is an update volume, as the encyclopedia did put out periodically, and this one they dealt with the personalities of the time.
It's a spectrum of human activity all across the board in 1924. And St. John Irvin
Oh, yeah.
wrote about drama as part of that, in which, of course, Shaw is quite talked about.
Prominently figured,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
There's a fascinating book, Who's Who in the Theater, which all theater buffs are aware of,
Oh, yeah.
as being an encyclopedia and professional journal. Quite a few.
Is that a new one or an old
This
one?
is one from 1971. It's the 14th and Jubilee edition. But in the same store, I bought the 1952, the 11th edition, which has Shaw's obituary in it, as having just died in 1950. It also lists in the back estates of famous theatrical people.
Oh, so
And
much
it lists how much money they left.
Oh, how much?
Theatrical wills here.
Oh,
Read you in order. Shows number 14 only.
yeah.
Starts with Al Jolson, who left £1,750,000.
Yes,
That's
yes,
in those
yes.
days.
Followed
yeah.
by Phineas T. Barnum at £1 million.
Yeah.
Goes on through Elsie DeWolf, Lotta, Fanny Bryce,
What
H.H.
did
Fraser.
What did Fanny Bryce leave?
It said £714,000. Died at age 59.
Yeah.
H.H. Fraser, Douglas Fairbanks, Wallace Beery, W. Graham Robertson,
Oh,
a fascinating
yeah.
painter
Yeah.
that wrote marvelous memoirs, which I have in my collection. Rocco J.S. Gotti, Edward Ledger, Frederick J. Nettleford, whoever these people were, James A. Bailey, and finally George Bernard Shaw.
What did he leave?
Dramatic author and essayist, former dramatic and music critic, age 94, £367,233, which in those days about $1.5 million in those
Oh,
days. About
but-
$6 million
but-
today.
Yeah.
But that was before the royalties came in from My Fair Lady.
Before My
Yeah.
Fair Lady. But you know, the story of that estate was that the people in England said that they valued the copyrights in all his plays at such a high figure
Yeah.
that it had nothing to do with the cash that was in the estate, but they said all your copyrights are worth so much that you got to pay tax on those copyrights, and so there was actually nothing left in the estate. They paid all the
They
government.
wiped it out and paid it
Yeah.
against future
Yes.
income.
Yeah.
You know.
And that was separate from Charlotte's estate.
Yes, yes, she had already died in 43.
And she had given hers to the Irish.
Now this is all new material that hasn't
Yeah.
anywhere near the entry in your listings, in your index.
Well, I've got them all in the computer now.
Uh-huh.
This is the only stuff that hasn't gone in the computer.
Huh?
But now I just have to find space on the shelves to put them. But here's a fascinating item. It's called William Morris in the Early Days of the Socialist Movement by J. Bruce Glazier. Only old socialists would know who J. Bruce Glazier was. I didn't know myself until I saw this book. But he has several chapters in which he meets Shaw, and I'm going to Morris's house, you know, and so on, and describes him and gives anecdotes and so on. All these books, you know, they're all full of anecdotes about Shaw, memories of Shaw by people who visited him, such as, for instance, Ingrid Bergman, who went over to Shaw and the first thing she said as she walked through his gate was that I don't like St. John, she said. She argued with him about it.
She never played. She did play it.
She played
did play it.
in Maxwell Anderson's or Annouille's.
She played in
Joan of Lorraine or
Annouille's,
something.
I think.
Annouille's,
Yeah,
oh,
she played in Annouille's St. John, and she really wasn't very good. She was a wonderful actress, but she wasn't good.
I recently picked up Marlene Dietrich's biography. She played in several Shaw plays back in the 1920s, what she talks about.
Yeah.
Not in any great detail, but she was in them. In the
She
German
might have
versions, of
been.
course.
She might have been in the Millionaires. She'd be typecast for it.
Well, I have you know.
I'm gonna.
All right, we're now back in the hallway looking at your more recent material concerned with Shaw. Rhoda, you want to do?
Yes, I want Isidore. There are two final questions because I want to bring your two lives together: your distinguished career as a musician, and of course your enormous preoccupation and expertise in Shaw. The first thing I noticed is the Paderewski. I mentioned that before. I can't for the life of me figure out the connection between Shaw and Paderewski, although I know the Shaw-Mozart, the Shaw-Wagner connections. Why have you got those two Paderewskis there?
It's quite fascinating. Shaw, of course, reviewed Paderewski in the 1890s as a music critic, and when Paderewski wrote these memoirs 40 years later, he, in two spots, ruefully remarked about the adverse criticism he got from Shaw. And at any rate, when Shaw, what's on the left is the first American edition from 1938. But when Shaw read this book, he wrote a letter to the authoress, Mary Lawton, and the letter became part of the first British edition. Forward by Mary Lawton, including letter from Bernard Shaw. Now this letter does not appear in the American edition, which was first, but it's the second, of course, which is of interest. And of course I found that here in New Zealand, the second edition. There's Bernard Shaw's signature and so on, in which he reminisces about Paderewski in the old days and the steel piano and so on.
And he didn't like Paderewski's sound very much.
That's right. I didn't like his way of pounding away.
Pounding.
What we would probably consider the normal way to play the
On the
piano
steel
nowadays.
grand piano.
But in those days, Shaw still had the memory of the wooden frame piano, which was a much more delicate sound.
But you also have something here that I think is a collector's item. It's a gem and really rather amusing.
Well, first let me say that down here is my file of periodical literature. Every one of these old magazines has something about Shaw in it. And as an example, I just take out this one. The Etude magazine, those of you into music might know, is a publication which lasted for almost 100 years, from the 1870s and 1950s, put out by Theodore Presser and Company in Philadelphia. It's sort of for students and amateurs. Now here, in 1931, December 1931, was published an interview. It says, containing a brilliant interview with George Bernard Shaw. Of course it had to be brilliant if it was with Shaw. Now, here it is. It's quite fascinating. It's one of my favorite anecdotes is in this article. There's Shaw, talks on modern music to a man named Walter Rummel. Now, he reminisces and so on. Now, over on page 2, here's Franz Rummel, famous virtuoso, father of Walter Rummel. At any rate, down here's a little scrap of music on the left. Now, this is one of the funniest jokes. I think those of you into music, familiar with Wagner's Tristan and Isolde,
Could you bring it a little closer, please?
which, as you know, the love death begins. Ti-da-di-da, ti-da-da. And it says it again. Ti-da-di-da, ti-da-da. Winds up another key. Now Shaw, on commenting on this, says, modern music, he said, is a matter of habit. I remember that my family was shocked at Wagner's Tristan. They would have liked the Liebestod sung in real Rossini style, and did not see why Wagner spoiled so good a beginning instead of going on like this. And this is Shaw's version of the same tune. It goes like this. Ti-da-di-dum, ti-da-di-dum, ti-da-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da. And that's Shaw's parody of Wagner. So that is just an example of what's going on here in the periodical collection. Now, in the periodicals also, managed to collect a few bound volumes of this, that, and the other thing. There's the Outline, a weekly magazine from around 1929 to 30 in England, which has lots of Shaw articles by and about. But I'm especially proud of this set here, which is The New Age. The magazine published and edited by Orridge from around 1907, and then he left, and it was carried on into the 1920s. But these particular 3 volumes are from 1907 through 1910. I picked them up in London from Manning Landry, who specializes in periodicals. And they have tons of articles by and about Shaw, Chesterton, and the whole business. As a matter of fact, this magazine was something the Fabian Society were thinking to found an actual popular kind of magazine, but when Orridge set this thing up with Shaw's help, they figured the New Age was publishing so much about socialism and everything that the New Age became really their official magazine for the things they wanted to have said. And there are many, many articles by and about Shaw in these 3 volumes. It's quite a treasure. So anyway, in this hall, as I might have mentioned, is everything by and about, not by Shaw, but about Shaw. Every person had something to say about Shaw in these books, letters, reminiscences, and just all kinds of things.
I even see, yes, and now I'm going to ask you the ultimate question.
Yeah.
It's a little morbid, but it has point. A friend and I were discussing what we would do, what we would save if we were in danger of losing everything in a fire. And she said she would take the family photographs. I ask you in that same spirit, you have here a collection which represents your heart's desire, your life's blood. Bear with me. What are 3 of the things that you would save first at the expense of everything else? What do you love the most?
Well, I suppose I'd have to grab those first editions there you saw in the glass case.
Big armful.
Big armful, yes.
armful.
The early
First
ones,
editions.
those are the hardest ones you can find.
But is there anything that you love without regard to its actual monetary worth? Is there anything that you love